Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this if you miss class. I hope that this pre writing exercise gives you ways to think about other pre writing exercises and gives you ways to get rid of the blank screen or the blank sheet of paper before you start working on your essay proper and gives you a good way to get started. It's one of my favorites, as I said before in class, and I really think that it does an excellent job of just allowing you to think about whatever the subject is in a lot of different ways. One quick thing I probably should have talked about this day one, but the idea of writing an essay. The etymology of the essay comes from the 1590s, and it has the idea of trial, attempt, endeavor. And I believe honestly that essays are a struggle, but they're a struggle to get your thoughts out on paper. And that's why I talk about the process. And I think that writing is always a process. Writing is always going to ask you to revise and fix even something that you think is publishable. You might want to revise and fix it, if not next week, next year, or 2 years down the road. You'll notice I say Mark Twain allegedly because I'm fairly convinced that three-quarters of the quotations of attributed to Twain or Einstein or Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi or Confucius, they never said them. But the fact of the matter is, I still want you to think about if the writer doesn't sweat, the reader will. Your job is to communicate. Communication is the sending and receiving of messages. And it is your job as a writer to sweat the sending so that the reader doesn't have to, so that the reader doesn't have to think, the reader doesn't have to interpret. You're sending a message that the reader can easily receive, easily understand. Let's get on to cubing. Step one, describe it. How would you describe this topic, this challenge? What are the characteristics, definitions, parameters? Remember that description sometimes will include appeals to the senses, so sight, smell, taste, touch, those sorts of things, sounds. How do you deal with that? For our essay, we're talking about CNN or the QWERTY keyboard or the internet or multitasking. Also, we're talking about an essay with those things involved. So, Green's view of CNN, Green's view of the QWERTY keyboard, Green's view of the internet, Rosen's view of multitasking. So, take 3 or 4 minutes. We're going to do 3 or 4 minutes in class. 3 or 4 minutes to describe CNN to the best of your ability, to describe the QWERTY keyboard to the best of your ability, to describe the internet to the best of your ability, to describe multitasking to the best of your ability, or to describe Green's view of those things or Rosen's view of multitasking to the best of your ability. Remember, I asked you in class to pick one topic and be ready to go with it. So, whichever article you picked, focus your entire daily writing on that article. So, if you want to pause here for a minute, take 3 or 4 to write, and then hit play again, that'll be great. If you want to go through the whole thing and then come back, click back through, that'd be great as well. But let's move on to step two. Is compare it. What is it similar to? Different from? Now, when we do a comparison contrast essay, you're going to hear me rant that compare is to show how things are the same, contrast is to show how they differ. But I think at the same time, for the purposes of this pre writing, we're not going to be picky. We're not going to be pedantic. We're just going to say, compare. What's it like? How does it differ? And again, we're going to take a look at the same elements of the essay. So, you can compare CNN to something else. You can compare the QWERTY keyboard to something else. The internet, multitasking. And again, compare the article. How is this article like other articles you've read? How does this article differ from other articles you read? For example, yesterday I happened to listen to a Keith Law podcast where he interviewed a professor about how we kind of are interpreting the internet wrong. And I think I need to go back and reread Green's essay and compare the points that Green is making about the internet with some of the points that the professor made about the internet. For example, the professor believes that the internet is not a tool for deliberative democracy. Um, and I don't know if Green would necessarily agree with that. So compare and contrast CNN with something else, the QWERTY keyboard with something else, the internet with something else, multitasking with something else. And again, their essay, their view of the subject with other views that you have encountered. Associate it. Remember that associate is things that apply to you, things that are personal to you. Associate it with events in your life, all right, with memories you have, with issues you've dealt with before, with things you have dealt with in class or at work or with friends. Does it make you think of anything you've worked on in the past? So, going back to CNN, I might associate CNN with the Challenger blowing up. It was the news source that dealt with that. The QWERTY keyboard, I might associate that with a typewriter that has been in my family for as long as I can remember. It is an old Underwood. It's one of those classic ones. You can see a photo of a similar one on the slide here. The internet. Can I associate the internet with anything personal in my life? Okay. Multitasking. Um, you know, for me, I associate it with doing many things poorly. Take a look at the article. Can you associate the article with other things? Okay. And I think, again, it's important to remember that this is personal. This is personal. This is memories, experiences that you have had, and you are associating it with those things. Step 4 is analyze it. What are the smaller parts that make up this thing? Is it possible to break down the issue? Is it possible to break down the article? For example, the article you're dealing with Green. Can you break it down into what he says about the subject and what associations he makes? One of the things he does throughout his articles, throughout his essays, is associate it with events in his life. You'll see the questions up here on the slide: who, what, why, when, where, how. Um, I think that those are always important parts of analysis. And again, analysis means to break it down into its parts. So let's break the QWERTY keyboard down into its parts. Break the article down into its parts. Break multitasking down into its parts. CNN, if I missed one of them, all of the subjects possible, break it down into its parts. How many parts are there? Can you break it down even further? Those of you who are math wizards, think about this as factoring. You're just trying to break it down until there's nothing left to factor out. Okay? And again, please remember, you can pause after each one of these and take 3-4 minutes to do that. You can run through this presentation and then come back and look at the slides. Whatever works for you is fine. The point is to eliminate the blank sheet of paper, to eliminate the blank screen, to get words down so that you can start pulling those words as you work on the essay. In class, I'm going to play this, and unfortunately, I don't think I can do it on the YouTube, uh, but I will leave a link for what analysis is not. We're going to talk about breaking things down into its parts, but this old commercial from Wendy's, I think, is a prime example of telling you what analysis is not. Step 5, apply it. How is it used? Who uses it? So, how could people use Green's view of CNN, of QWERTY, of the internet? How could people use Rosen's view of multitasking? All of those are important. How do people use CNN? How do people use the keyboard, the internet? How do people use multitasking? Remember, as you're writing, as you're taking the 3, 4, 5 minutes to just apply this thing and to associate this thing and to describe this thing and whatever all else we're doing with it, I do think it's important to understand that you're talking about both the article and the thing. I've stressed that a few times. I want to stress that one more time. And once again, if you want to pause here, right, that's great. If you want to go all the way through and come back, that's great. But work to eliminate the blank screen and work to really learn how to use this pre-writing tool. Step 6 is argue for it or against it. I've said in class several times, and I will probably repeat in class thousands of times, everything's an argument. Everything's an argument. But when you argue for something or against something, it's not the volume, it's not the intensity, it's the reasons you have for supporting something, the reasons you have for opposing something. So, why would you oppose CNN? Why would you support CNN? Why would you oppose the internet? Why would you support the internet? Why would you support multitasking? Why would you oppose multitasking? Why would you support the QWERTY keyboard? Why would you oppose it? Would you support Rosen's view of multitasking? Would you support Green's view of the 3 subjects? Would you oppose Green's view? Would you support Rosen's view? And I'm not sure why I have 2 views on the slide here, but think about it twice. We'll just go with that. Okay. Again, I'm going to play this video in class. I will have a link for it. But this is a video by a guy named Nick Chapaz, and he's talking about an ink pen, a simple ink pen that I believe you can buy at Walmart. And he summarizes it and he responds to it. And so I think what's important to understand is if he can give an 8 or 10 minute video on a Parker Jotter, you should be able to easily give an 2 to 3 page essay on the internet, especially when you've got another article to deal with, on multitasking, especially when you've got an article to deal with, on CNN or the QWERTY keyboard. And so we're going to talk again. I won't play this. There'll be a link in the description. In class, we'll run through it. Take the time to eliminate the blank page. Take the time to use this exercise to the best of your ability. And I think that from there, we're just going to wrap this one up. Remember that these are the 4 topics for your essay, and we're going to try to work through this thing as best we can before we move on to the narrative and the comparison contrast, the other essays we're going to do in class. Hope everybody has a good day. Hope to see you in class. Take care.